Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Jim Down. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jim. How are you?
Very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very exciting to have you here. Jim, tell me a bit about where you're from and where your son James was born.
I'm actually from the UK. I was born quite near Heathrow. So, I was born in 1963. And
we're a similar age.
Yeah, basically spent most of my youth in a smaller town to the west of London called Wokingham, near Reading.
I've heard of Reading.
Yeah, so it's about 7 miles from Reading. So in between Reading and Windsor is where you find Wokingham.
Did you get married and have your first children in the UK?
Yeah, so our firstborn was actually born in Ascot, the famous racecourse. So there's a hospital right outside the racecourse there, and that's where Daniela was born.
Okay, great. Is James your second child?
Yeah, so James is number 2. For a career move, I actually went down to the Middle East and I joined a company there called Gamco. And then I moved back to join Cathay Pacific, actually, but in Frankfurt. So we were living in Frankfurt at that time, and James was born there in a little town called Hanau, which you may have heard of. It's where the Brothers Grimm are from.
Oh, right. Okay. Tell me about your wife's pregnancy when she had James. Was it unremarkable or were there any problems? Did you know what was coming when he was born?
No, it was very unremarkable. There were slight differences. We had a comparison at the time between the UK and Germany, which is where we were living. Yeah, there was nothing remarkable about it at all. In fact, we were going to the paediatrics for checkups with Claire more regularly perhaps than in England, in fact. And scans were more regularly used and everything was going very normally and no problems at all during pregnancy.
Tell me a bit about the birth. Were you there?
Yeah, I was. The birth was very quick in terms of from when the waters broke to actual delivery, probably less than 4 hours, I think, from start to finish.
Gosh, that is fast.
Yeah, it was.
So painful then.
Well, it was painful in the fact that there was no time for any medication or even gas and air, anything like that. So it was pretty, start to finish, full on, very, from what I remember, continuous sort of pain and a strong crescendo right to the end from start to finish.
When James was born, did you immediately know that something wasn't quite right?
Yeah. So as soon as he was born, I could see that he looked a little sort of small and he didn't look quite right. There was just something a little odd, but nothing too alarming. He had all the fingers and toes and everything, and they took quite a while to resuscitate him, get him breathing. But there was a big focus on Claire. She had some problems with bleeding in the uterus, which they were trying to treat in a very archaic sort of way. They were pushing very forcefully on her stomach at the time, very soon after the placenta had been delivered. So, yeah, it was quite painful and traumatic for Claire, from start to finish. Meanwhile, James was put over in an incubator, and when he did cry, he was quite weak. But again, nothing really sort of fazed me at that time.
How did he develop in the first few months of his life?
Well, actually, from that moment, going back to the birth, really, he was, after a few hours in the incubator, they decided that they needed to take him away to have a good look at him and take so just do a bit more of an evaluation. And we didn't really think that was too odd because being in Germany, we thought, okay, maybe that's what they do. But after some time, can't remember how long, it was probably not more than an hour, maybe two, we were both asking where he was and could we get him back. And they were saying, well, actually, there's been some further problems. We have some concerns. We've moved him to another hospital.
Oh, what?
Yeah. So without telling us, they had taken James to a much larger hospital in Hanau. So the hospital where Claire had the delivery was a very small hospital with very simple sort of delivery room and nothing specialist available there.
This was back in the late 80s or early 90s.
Yeah, he
James
was
is
born
what,
in
28
90.
now?
Yeah, he was
right,
born in
1990.
90. Yeah.
Okay. Were you shocked that he'd been taken away to another hospital without even speaking to you?
Yeah, totally shocked. Obviously, we were quite concerned. Having had Daniela in the UK, and the atmosphere there was very different to what we were expecting or to what we experienced in Germany. And it was one of those things where it just slowly crept upon you. It wasn't something that we had planned, and the birth had seemingly gone quite well. And then suddenly, everything changed. And so I said to Claire, look, you better stay here, because she couldn't move anyway. She was still in a little bit of trouble from the delivery. The doctor said to me, well, you can go over to the other hospital if you want to go and see your child. I basically ran to this other hospital. I had no knowledge of how to get there. I didn't even think about getting a taxi or whatever. So I just ran. It was about 5 kilometers to this other hospital.
Were you in a bit of a panic? Like, did you know what was going on at that point? Had they
no
given
clue.
you any indication?
Nothing, no. When I look back, it probably was a bit panicked. But, I was quite reasonably fit and healthy guy back then. So I thought, yeah, I'd jog across, get there as quick as I can. So I jogged over there and was taken into a special care ward where James was in a little incubator. And then the story began to unfold about what was wrong.
What did they first tell you?
They listed so many things. I can't recall all of them at the time, but these were more like just observations. They didn't really understand either themselves at the time, but they were saying things like he has a very high cleft palate, not cleft, but very high palate in his mouth. That was one observation. They noticed that he was gripping his thumbs like this all the time, and his breathing was quite labored. And so they had him on an oxygen supply.
Did they do that APGAR test? The APGAR test where they test their sort of reactions and give them a number out of 10?
I can't recall it being called that, but I'm pretty sure they went through a whole range of tests to just see. I mean, this is, a few hours old. He was not even a day at this point. And they just came out with this big list of things, which I was thinking, well, okay, these are observations which they've made, but what does it mean? We didn't really understand at that time what we were about to face.
What were your fears at that time?
I didn't really have that many fears other than, obviously survival was the key point, and he looked like after a couple of days, things had settled down and he was just James and he was breathing normally. He was having a lot of trouble feeding. Obviously, with Claire not being in the same hospital for the first few days, breastfeeding was not an option. So Claire was expressing and we were using bottle feed as well straight from the beginning. But he was struggling with the whole concept of feeding at that time. He wasn't very strong at suckling, and we wondered if it was the teat and the size and the whole thing. So it was very early days in discovering how this would pan out and what we needed to do.
When did it become clear to you, or when did you get a diagnosis from the doctors, what James was actually dealing with and what you were looking at?
I think he was in that initial intensive care for a few days, and then they put him into a pediatrics ward. And so we started to unravel, more and more about James and understand what his problems were. Again, we didn't really have a diagnosis. There was nothing that they could pinpoint as to what the problem was. So we were just dealing with him as a person and trying to, get to grips with how to feed him, and all the stuff you do with a new baby, changing diapers and sort of understanding his little moods and sleep patterns and things like that. When we did eventually get him home, the hospital were putting us in touch with a local pediatrician So we didn't actually have to go back to the hospital very often. They just put us in touch with a local pediatrics doctor, and it was a great place. I mean, we met some people in there that eventually we befriended, an Irish couple that were living nearby us as well. And, so we used to toodle off to the hospital once, or the doctors once a week, I think it was back then, just for checkups and see how he was progressing.
How did he progress over the first few months of his life compared to your daughter, say?
Yeah,
What differences did you know?
Yeah, there was obviously the concerns started to happen when you are looking at the development graphs and starting to do comparisons, and the comparisons were way off. So the curve on the graph, James was just flatlining basically. He didn't seem to be growing either in size or weight. And we also noticed that he would not retain much of his milk. He would be throwing it up quite often. I think breastfeeding went on for about a month and then expressing, and then we just switched to formula.
Did that make a difference?
No, it wasn't any better at all, actually. So we were trying different techniques to feed him slowly and, sort of different angles and all this stuff. And you'd think you'd just cracked it and then he would throw it up again. Yeah, that was quite difficult to understand why this was happening and what we needed to do to support him and develop him. So he was born in November the 19th, 1990. I was working for Cathay Pacific in Frankfurt at the time. Because of all the difficulties, I mean, we had been sent to a hospital in Würzburg as well to go and see this specialist doctor there who was going to do some diagnosis for us. So we were traveling all over Germany as well. And with Daniela being only 2, she's actually November the 20th, 1988.
Oh, right.
Very close in terms of dates of birth, but 2 years apart. So we had a little baby to deal with as well as Daniela. It was at that point I decided we probably ought to go back to England to be at least more supported with our, family around us at that time. So we headed off back to the UK and, sort of got back into the UK medical system and started going through all the tests and various different things that we had to go through and that we volunteered ourselves to go through as well to try and improve things.
And then did you find a big difference between the two medical systems when you moved back to the UK?
I think technically, no, the systems in Germany and the UK are very technically advanced, as you'd expect from those places. The only difference really is the language. Obviously, I did speak a little bit of German whilst living there and I could get by, but it was difficult to understand sometimes, the technicalities of what the people were talking about. So, of course, it made it much easier when we went back to England and we could speak to doctors, at the same level.
I guess in a way you had grandparents then to help look after Daniela while you were off at the doctors, and you could, your wife would have had support while you were off at work and things like that. So
yeah, exactly.
That must have made a difference.
Yeah, it did. And, we were certainly well supported in that regard. And the medical system in the UK is, quite good at assisting people with special needs children. So, yeah, as things started to unravel, we were getting more and more offers of help, sort of things like respite care. But even back then, at times it was actually too much to take in terms of we didn't need this. James was still a little baby that we could deal with and we could handle. He was obviously small and lightweight, so we could carry him around and transport him, no problem. We didn't need schools at that time. We needed physiotherapy and support in a medical way for sure. And we were doing as much as we could at that time that we thought was, within scope, certainly within our capability.
And did you have any sort of understanding at any point of how profoundly disabled James was going to be at that young age? Had you had any actual diagnosis and prognosis?
No. So, in fact, we still do not have a diagnosis or
you
prognosis.
Don't now?
No. And one of the interesting visits, we went to Great Ormond Street to see a specialist there, Dr. Baretza. He was very senior in paediatrics in the UK. We were told he was one of the best, and if you were going to find out more about your child, this was the guy to go and see. So we were sent off to see Dr. Baretza, and we spent, I think, 2 days in Great Ormond Street with James, and he had various tests done. And then Dr. Baretza sat us down and said, basically, half the children I see here are undiagnosed and will never get a diagnosis. And that was quite a revelation, actually, to think that there were things that you could have as a syndrome or as a condition that would not ever be diagnosed was a bit of a strange one.
I'm really surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I thought you were going to tell me that he had cerebral palsy or that there was something that you finally found out as he grew older, but it never came about.
No. We had genetics testing, we had chromosomal testing, and there were, at the time, I mean, we're talking probably, 25 years ago, 26 years ago now, and at that time, the database revealed nothing that they could compare to. So we haven't had James's chromosomes rechecked since, or the genetics, whether there is something now that they could say, yeah, actually, there are other people with this, and we've called it that. But to be honest, an interesting concept really was given to us by one doctor in our local Ascot, where Daniela was born. We used to go to the specialist there once in a while. He was really good. When I look back at it, he was very profound, very wise. And he said, you don't have to worry about what the label is. You just got to deal with him as a person. And that was very true. And that was the approach that we took. We didn't focus on finding out what it was. We just focused on handling him as a person in our family.
What sort of things did you have to adapt and adjust to? I guess you had to get him into a wheelchair because you realised he couldn't walk, and then his speech didn't develop and things like that. How did it evolve?
Yeah, so I guess from the very early days, as the development didn't progress as you would expect, speech never came along and he still doesn't speak any words. There were times where he went through phases where he could do things that he can't do now. What happened was, as we went to this hospital in the UK, we were contemplating having another child. And at that time, it was quite scary because we didn't know what to expect. And we asked for guidance. And the same doctor, who was very wise, he sat us down and he said, well, actually, you've got about a 15% chance of a recurrence. And we said, well, what does a normal person have in terms of percentage of having an unwell child? And he said, well, it's about 15%. So I said, well, we're no worse off then. So we're actually going to go ahead and have another child. So we did, and everything worked out fine with that one. Toby was born in 1994. So James was 4 years old at the time. It was really, really stressful.
I bet.
The build up to it, we just said the pregnancy and the birth was very good and nothing was detected. So that was really on the back of my mind. We went through the third pregnancy.
I can imagine. And you had a fourth one as well, didn't you?
We had 2 more after that. So we have 5 in
you
total.
Have 5
yeah,
in
we
total.
didn't give up.
Oh my gosh. So that's amazing that you...
And they're all really healthy and fantastic.
And did you have the same fear with 4 and 5?
No, actually, Toby kind of settled the nerves, I guess.
Right, yeah.
He came out as
that makes sense.
Yeah, strong baby boy. And then fourth was a boy as well, who was pretty big and strong. And then number 5 is another daughter, Rosie. So we have a daughter at either end and 3 boys in the middle.
All right. Well, that sounds very perfect.
It was really good. And, it's been, obviously, our family development has been centered around James in a way. And I guess numbers 3, 4 and 5 children probably may not have happened had we not had James.
Why is that, do you think?
I think we needed to not prove to ourselves that we were able to produce more normal children, but it was definitely a support thing. I was thinking, definitely we need some brothers and sisters for James.
You're thinking long term.
Yeah.
As you get older
Yeah.
and when you guys aren't here anymore, he's got some siblings that can help look after him.
Yeah, and of course, when the children were very small and we were a lot younger back then, it is difficult to project that future. So all that was going through my mind at the time was we need to have support available because it would be unfair on Daniela to be left with this if that ever came to that end.
Yeah. It's amazing, though, to think of you having 5 children and a job and one of them having a lot of challenges. I mean, a lot of people can't manage 2 or 3 kids. How did you manage with 5?
I think what James taught us really was that there's no script, there's no rule book, and you just need to get on with it. And that's the approach that we took. I think we were lucky in that regard because no one is expecting to have an unwell child or a special needs child. So to be given that responsibility was something that obviously has shaped us entirely. And, having 4 other very healthy, very capable, sporting, brilliant kids made it all worthwhile, of course.
Yeah. Did you have sort of hopes and dreams for James before he was born, and then you've discovered that you had to really let go of them and sort of live in the moment more? And was that difficult, or was that something that you hadn't really considered?
I guess it's hard to remember actually whether or what I was dreaming of. I mean, I think with Daniela being the first, you just don't know what to expect. And then number 2 comes along and that's actually hard. And then number 3 was probably the most difficult in terms of now you've got 3 and, as you say, special needs as well. And 4 and 5 just get on with it. They're now thrown in the mix and they survive. And, it's an interesting sort of life skill that they develop very quickly. But no, I don't think I've ever had real ambition for James. I mean, I can't remember it with any of them. I've always just hoped for a healthy, normal family. That's, I guess, what most people would hope for.
Like a lot of people, it can put a lot of strain on their marriage and it can, change your priorities and, your life's purpose and direction. Did you find that it impacted your marriage and make things more difficult? Did it bring you closer? Did you just carry on and you were fine? How did it impact you both?
I was trying to think how I would describe that as you're asking that question. I guess it was a bit like a whirlwind in a way. We got carried away into it and it wasn't much we could do. We did make some decisions along the way which changed the course of what we do and how we
Like moving
approached
back
it.
to the UK?
Yeah, like moving back to the UK. But also when we resettled in the UK and then we started into this health system program, we obviously wanted to fix James. You know, we were naive enough to think that there must be a way that we can help him and make him better. So we explored all of those things and we tried, like I said, you know, we went to Great Ormond Street, we went to the Radcliffe in Oxford to, you know, have different things checked out. But one of the most important things we did was we found a self-help group and the place was called St Breville's in Monmouth in Wales. And I would sing their praises, you know, every day because they were amazing. And it was a family that had also gone through a similar situation, a special needs child, and they found this medical support wanting. They wanted to do more. And so they created this system of self-help. It was really interesting. When we found out about it, we were sort of advised by a family that we had met through James. And they said, oh, you know, you should try this place. It's got a good reputation and very good. So we signed up and we went there. And yeah, it cost money because, you know, they had to, it's a charitable foundation, but they still needed to charge the people going along. So we had to work hard to get enough money to go there. And what they did was you went there for a week, basically a Monday to Friday, and they did a full assessment on you as a family and your child. So we had to go prepared with things like diet sheets for James and, you know, sort of a daily lifestyle and, you know, how we conduct our life. So we went along and we listened to some lectures and then they evaluated us and James. And then we had a day off to go and visit the area. And the next day they gave you this program. And it was really interesting, actually. There was 3 elements to it: stimulation mentally for James, stimulation physically, and then a nutritional program. And we learned a lot about child development through them. And we learned a lot about how to manage a special needs child. So the only thing with this program was it's very intensive. It was about, we had to get 30 people in to help us do this. So we had a roster. Every day we were doing 2.5 to 3 hours in the morning, 2.5 to 3 hours in the afternoon.
Wow.
And we had people coming in to help us do this because it was not achievable alone.
And was that family, friends, or was that professionals?
We did involve the family, but we didn't want to burden them with too much. So it was very limited. And that was the idea of getting so many people involved. So we actually went into the local press. Back then it was just newspapers.
Yeah.
And we put out a request for help. And we got some fantastic people respond.
What a great idea.
You'd be surprised how brilliant some people are at responding to support needs like that.
Yeah, a lot of people want to give back to the community in some way, don't they? I think it helps people feel good about themselves.
Yeah, so we had ladies coming in and blokes as well, guys who, you know, wanted to give some time, and retired people or people that were shift workers that had some spare time. And so we embarked on this program, and we did the program for about 3 years in all, and we did see some changes. Now, it's not the remarkable story where James suddenly gets up and walks. It was never going to be that way, and we understood that at that time.
You knew that it was only going to be small improvements.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't sure how much improvement we could get, but we just wanted him to be as healthy and live his life to the fullest that he could. And I would say without a shred of a doubt, the nutrition was the big one for us. So when we first went to St Breville's, we showed them our diet sheet. You know, we were giving the same things that we would have given Daniela or our subsequent children, you know, cereals for breakfast, you know, porridges, dairy products, yogurts, those types of things. And they were very critical in a nice way about what we were giving him. And they said, no, you need to cut out all the dairy and you need to cut out this, that, and the other. So we did. And we didn't really see a massive improvement at that time. It was a quarterly visit. So you got your program, you went away, you did some of the work, then you went back for a check and, you know, to kind of reinvigorate and make sure you're doing things correctly. So we went in the first year, I think we went 4 times to St Breville's. And they asked us for, you know, a statement before we went on the first revisit. We were saying, you know, we haven't seen any improvements. He's still throwing up. He's not growing. And we're not sure that the diet is working. So they actually advised us to do a hair test, which you can do today, actually. There's online companies that'll take a lock of hair and you send it off to them and they'll give you a report based on what they find in hair test. You can detect intolerances. It's not necessarily
allergies.
Right, yeah. It's a whole range of things. And I guess depending on your lifestyle and what you can honestly expect to do, you change your diet accordingly. So when we got this report back about James, it was quite extensive, and it was things like peas, beans, lentils, pulses, citrus fruits, dairy products, eggs, chicken,
What, that's everything he was intolerant
rice.
to?
That was the intolerances, yeah.
Oh,
And we were thinking, well, what do we
what are we
feed
going
him
to
then?
feed him? Yeah.
So we moved on to things like fish and whole brown rice and a lot more healthy things, fruits, and we would puree a lot of things for him. We would try and weave that into our diet as well. So that, he wasn't eating special foods. He was eating what we were eating, but it was more tuned for him. And it really worked. Honestly, I would say overnight we saw an improvement in terms of his ability to retain the food. And he then started to grow. So he started to actually start to track up the scale. So his progress was really remarkable in terms of his development.
How old was he when you went to this St. Breville's?
I think it was about 2 years, 2 years old.
Right, so that was very early on. So that's great that you got that sorted so young.
Yeah.
And that must have taken some of the pressure and strain off in the family, and, seeing him grow must have really been a relief.
Yeah, in some ways, of course, having him healthy, and it was a huge relief to see him develop in that regard. Another thing with James was he was very prone to colds, and he seemed to always have a thick clogged nose and sinuses, and all of that stopped with the diet change. The only thing that really impacted us greatly was this program of trying to manage James, program of physical and mental health during the day. And as I said, we had this rota of people coming in, and that took its toll, actually, to be honest. Claire was obviously around most of the time. She would disappear sometimes, go shopping or whatever, but generally was around the house while I was at work. I was a shift worker at Cathay Pacific at the time.
Oh, you're on shift work as well?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
But no night shifts per se, but,
right.
Earlys
Different
or lates.
times, yeah. And also being a full-time carer, even with support, can be just so stressful and draining. And
yeah. So after about 3 years or so of doing this, I think it was when we were going to Great Ormond Street one time, we were going to go on the London Underground to come back to where I'd parked the car, which was at West London. And Claire had a panic attack. And we didn't know what it was at the time, but she said, I can't do this. I can't go down into the train, into the tube. And it was all a bit strange. And then we realised after taking her to the doctor that things were just getting on top. So again, this very wise doctor at Heatherwood Hospital in Ascot, he said, look, you just need to do what fits in with you. It's really honourable what you're doing. You're not going to fix James, but you can make life good for him. But you are more important than he is right now.
Yes, because you've got to look after him and all the other children. Yeah.
And of course, Daniela as well was, when we look back at it, she was just fantastic in that she was part of it. She was involved in helping him, and only 2, 3, 4 years old, so quite young. But she was such a live wire. It really, kept us going. And the fact that she was so, supportive and healthy made it, we were more capable to take care of James. So, we were a family of 4 at the time and a strong unit. You mentioned about how did it affect our relationship. I think it didn't really affect it at all, actually. I mean, probably I should say we were stronger together and we were a good team. We are a good team. And we had to be to deal with James. But at that point where Claire had the panic attack, we realised actually that we were perhaps doing a bit too much for us. As I said, there's no script in this, and some people go in both feet and they go full bore to fix their child. And we've met families that spend their entire lives just, supporting their special needs person, their child, to an extent that we could never achieve. And I was realistic about that all from the beginning. It was something that we just felt that, okay, we need to survive. That was very obvious. And we need to be there for Daniela. She needs a life. So let's do what we think is about right.
So you had to find that balance and still do, the diet and, some sort of treatment and rehabilitation, or it's not even rehabilitation, is it?
It was just habilitation.
Not rehabilitating. But just doing the stimulation. That's the word I'm looking for, the physical and emotional, but making sure you've got that balance so that everybody's happy and healthy.
So what we did actually was we cut it by half. We just did the program in the mornings. And then conveniently, when I look back, it sort of all fell into place. So we needed to do something from when we found out that things were serious. And then we did it up to the point where we throttled back a little bit. And then he started to be eligible to go to school. So there was a special needs school quite close to us in Bracknell. We were living in Bracknell at the time, so just near Wokingham. And he went to school for, sort of 8 till 2 or whatever it was in the afternoon.
And how did he manage with that?
Well, being a special needs school, there was a bus that picked him up. He would trot to school, of course, wheelchair bound. So everything was geared up for, a disabled person. And he went into the school system in the UK and, was able to be at school during the day. He wasn't too much of a problem. I need to say that actually, James has never really been a big problem other than health.
Right.
Like, he's not a demanding child. He's not a demanding person now.
He's pretty easygoing, is he?
Very easygoing.
When he was little, could you connect with him? Could you feel any sort of connection, even through his eyes or recognition or him responding to any commands? Or, were you able to get a sense of whether he could understand what you were talking about or anything like that?
Yeah, we've always accepted that we'll probably never know, but I think there is some ability, in his head to understand what's going on. There's little subtleties that we know as parents and his, close relatives will not understand. They are very subtle. We know when he's happy. We know when he's sad.
How can you tell?
He smiles a lot when he's happy. And when he's upset or he doesn't want you around him, he pushes you away, or he just, he's not interested in things. When he's not well, you can tell, through the way he behaves, his sleep patterns. And yeah, I think those little changes that we saw when we were doing the program, we did see things progress at the time, remarkable way, because we were looking for little changes and we saw them. Things like in the physical exercises we were doing, when we were advised about the development needs for a child, we were told about the phases that a baby goes through. The first things they do, maybe smile, and then they, tend to sort of try and sit up, and then they tend to shuffle, and then they crawl, and then, so those development stages.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to try and take James through that physically ourselves, and that was what the program was about. We did this thing called patterning, so getting him to actually do the crawling motion by helping him with his arms and legs. So we had two people either side, one on each arm, an arm and a leg, and then you coordinate your movements. And eventually he was crawling. He did actually manage to crawl.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And he managed to do this commando crawl as well, where he would pull himself along with both arms. And he could sit up in the bath, for example. He could sit up in the bath and do that sort of thing. And then we had a ramp. So to make it a little more difficult, we had him crawling uphill, and he could do that. He actually, very rarely, but he clapped on command a couple of times.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that must have been quite overwhelmingly exciting as parents to see him do something like that.
Yeah, because now we're focused on these little milestones, not the big ones that you would normally focus on, as we had done with Daniela. We were retuning to what we were expecting him to do. And it was little steps, but we were very proud of those. And, it was great to see him doing them.
Did you ever feel a sense of dread or why me or, disappointment with that cards that you had been dealt, or did your wife ever express that to you as well? Or were you just like, this is where we are in life and this is how it is and we're getting on with it?
I think we have been lucky in that regard, because I think if James had been born first, it would have been a lot different. But because we had this remarkable child, Daniela, who has gone on to do incredible things and, is a bit of a hero. Sorry.
That's okay. You're obviously really proud of her.
Yeah.
And I think it does make a difference to have that child first, and then you've got that to look after and that to keep you going and driving, so that you don't have that sort of why me, because there's no point feeling like that, I guess, because you've got somebody else you've got to put your time and energy into.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Daniela has been a very strong pillar of our lives. And she was number one. So the fact that she was so good gave us the ability to know that things were unfortunate. And honestly, we know that we didn't do anything wrong, because I've never taken drugs. Back then I didn't drink too much. Maybe I do now a little bit, but not then.
Well, after 5 kids.
Claire smoked a little bit when she was younger, but she didn't smoke. She doesn't drink. So we knew that it wasn't anything we had done that caused this.
And did you know that right from the beginning? Was that something that you didn't ever question?
Absolutely. I mean,
that's great, isn't it? Because it'd be terrible to be like, oh, if only, and what if I,
Yeah. I mean, I'm not spiritual in any way. I'm not religious. I'm very much an atheist. My kids will testify to that.
Me too.
But I guess that's why I'm an engineer. I'm a bit sort of mechanically minded. And I guess I was able to rationalize with the incredible miracle that life is, and the fact that we develop from these minute composite materials and we grow into a human being. There's always an element of something going wrong. And that's how I've rationalized it. When I look at my other kids, as I said, Daniela and Toby and Rosie and Sam, they've all probably got a little bit of what James doesn't have. So it is what it is. And James has always just accepted it. I don't think he questions it either. I don't think he's looking at other people saying, I wish I was like them. I think James just accepts it. As I said, he's never been a problem in his moods or demanding child.
You haven't seen him sort of be frustrated that he can't do anything or that he can't communicate or he can't get his point across or anything like that?
No, actually, no. He comes out with us whenever we can take him. We go to rugby, we watch the kids play rugby and football, and he comes with us whenever we can take him. We have a helper at home, obviously, to make life easier for us. And that's been one of the key factors, I guess, of coming to Hong Kong and us remaining here.
Yes,
is the fact that you can,
aren't we? Because to have helpers and they're brilliant, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think if we'd been in the UK, we probably wouldn't have James with us at home now, but we do. So that's just been an incredible journey as well.
What were his siblings like with him as they grew up? Were they embarrassed? Were they absolutely supportive and fine? Did it go through shifts and changes? Do you think it was hard for them to have a special needs brother?
I think it has been at times, yeah. I can remember when we first came to Hong Kong, obviously James was still quite small. So we arrived here in 97, just before the handover. And so he would have been 7 years old. And he wasn't in a wheelchair at the time. He was more in a pushchair, a buggy, which I guess made it more difficult for people to understand. So that there was this young person who was 7 years old in a buggy who looked a little bit strange. James doesn't have really dysmorphic features, but you can tell there's something slightly wrong with him. And in Hong Kong, with so many mainland Chinese people, they are very inquisitive and they show that inquisitive nature very openly. So, for better word, James would be stared at quite a lot. And I think Claire and I occasionally have gotten a bit frustrated with that, but overall, you kind of accept it. And sometimes having James out and about is one of the reasons I've always wanted to do that, is to allow people to engage with him and see that, there's another side to life. And this is what is unfortunately James has had to deal with. And sometimes little kids, maybe at rugby or something, will, really stare and can't quite work out what it's all about. And I'll just introduce James to him and say, you can talk to him if you want. And, I think that's been a good thing. For my children, though, for the other children, they've been very supportive, probably more so as they've grown older. They've obviously, as a young kid, James is just James and life just carries on. We go and do things, we go on holidays and life is normal for them. As they've gotten older, they've become more in tune with, the challenges and, been very good with it. Daniela particularly really strikes a chord with him. When she lives overseas, she lives in Amsterdam. When she comes back to Hong Kong with her partner now as well, they're very engaging with James and he lights up. You can tell they've got something. There's
isn't
a bond.
That lovely?
Yeah.
So they've got that real bond from their very early days when she was helping, caring.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
There was one point when he was in hospital in this special care ward, and this one will get me going. Obviously, James was in a special care unit, and at that time, no one other than parents were allowed into the ward for obvious reasons.
This is when he was a baby?
Yeah, tiny. So he was a few days old.
Mm-hmm.
Claire's mum came out to help us, and she was staying with us. And Daniela and Joyce came to the hospital, but they couldn't come into the ward. So they would sit outside in a little waiting area. And one day I saw this courtyard just out, and I thought, maybe Daniela could see James from there. So I took them out into the courtyard and I said, just peer through. And I can still see that moment where it was snowing. And
she's looking through the window to him. Oh, that's so sweet. You're emotional about it now. Did you feel emotional about it at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you know why?
Pressure, I guess.
Yeah.
Dealing with...
And the fact she couldn't come in and be with the family?
Yeah, it was, we were in a new world. We were away from home. It was difficult.
You were young as well.
Yeah, relatively young. We didn't really understand what was going on, obviously. James was just born and
there was no internet for you to search up anything then or anything like that?
Probably just as well. I mean...
yeah, that could have been
stuff
more
you can
traumatic.
Find out now,
that's true. But the support networks aren't as prolific as they were back in those days as well. So you must have quite felt on your own.
Yeah, certainly in Germany we did, and that's why we decided to up sticks and go back to the UK. And in the UK, as I said, it was really well set up, but maybe at that time we weren't ready for it and it was too much. Having come to Hong Kong, it's pretty negligible here, which is a shame. There's some good stuff. Obviously, ESF have Sarah Rowe, which is where James ended up going to. And
Oh, did he? Went there?
yeah, and that was really the enabler for us to come here because, as I said, James was 7. He was at school. Things were going quite well. I had a great job in London with Cathay there, but the career opportunity opened up. And at that time, Claire and I definitely felt we'd seen everything. We were dealing with him physically, mentally, and his health as well. He'd had a few things go wrong in the UK where it was a bit scary, but we got through it and we learned to deal with it. And, he went through this epileptic phase. He was having epileptic seizures, but mostly when he was unwell. So it wouldn't be all the time. It would just be when some underlying problem was about to hit him.
And were you able to get that under control?
Yeah, we had a fairly new drug at the time, which was like a liquid. I think it was called sodium valproate, which is actually a horrible drug. We gave that to him for quite a number of years, but that didn't fix it. As I said, he only really experienced these epileptic seizures, and they were grand mal as well. They were quite significant.
And that's quite scary.
It was, yeah. Again, we learned to deal with it okay, but the only thing that would really calm him down from those seizures was Valium. So we had to give him Valium shots, and then we were doing that at home, and there wasn't a problem with that. And then to try and prevent them happening, the doctors actually gave him prescription Valium, which he was taking a very small amount, but it was significant because that was a key change in James. He went from being this kind of developing person who was quite mobile at the time. He would shuffle around. And I was just thinking there as well, he also had a little walking frame. So he was actually walking in a walking frame. He would steer himself around. It was quite good. But when he was on the anti-seizure drugs, that changed him. It was a big change.
So he became less mobile.
Yeah, very.
Right, probably because he was just a bit more out of it and didn't have the energy.
Yeah, exactly right. He would sleep a lot and he really didn't have energy. And you could see that he was struggling with it. And we were thinking, that it was just his condition, but actually it was the drugs. And what happened when we came here, one of the things that I needed to establish was the Sarah Rowe School, which was the big enabler. And Mike Doherty was the head of Sarah Rowe, who was absolutely amazing, really key sort of enabler for me to come here. He guaranteed James a spot, even though there wasn't a spot. He said, if you want to come to Hong Kong, there'll be a spot for him.
Oh,
and the school, great. Sarah Rowe is under pressure for, places.
Oh, sure, for sure.
And somehow he managed to increase the number of students in the school just at the right time for me to get in.
One more kid, yeah.
Perfect, thanks,
Mike. Oh,
Mike.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so we came here, and one of the things we did when we came here, obviously we needed to work out how we were going to get these drugs for James. There was also a milk we were giving him. It was a milk substitute, basically a chemical concoction, which I look back on it in horror now, but it worked for James. It was a sort of milk substitute, which I was trying to think on the way here what it tasted like, because I tasted it a couple of times and it was disgusting.
Was it? Like milk emulsion? Did you ever have that?
That's the stuff. Yeah. That was what I was thinking of, yeah. It was like
kids.
That.
Okay,
but he used to drink
like chalk.
Milk of magnesia, that was
that's
called.
That's it,
yeah.
Milk of magnesia. Yeah, that's it.
You got that when you were ill, right? Your parents gave it to you.
Yeah.
So it was like that, but it worked for him. He didn't throw it up. He grew, he developed as a result of putting him on that stuff. So to get hold of that, progestamil it was called, and the drugs to control the epilepsy were key. But after a short period, we visited a doctor here. We sort of managed to find a system of getting into the medical system here, being seen by pediatrics. And it wasn't very frequent. It was like once a year. Obviously, when we first got here, we were desperate to try and get into it, and we did. And then I just said to this doctor one day, we're giving him all these drugs. When do you wean off a normal child, a well child, from this type of drug? And they said, it would only be maybe a couple of years, 3 years. And I said, well, James has been on this for 5 years now, and I want to wean him off of it. The doctor said, well, it has its consequences, obviously, doing that. You're opening yourself up to what if he does have seizures? Are you going to be able to control it? And I said, yeah, if you supply us with Valium shots, and these are like rectal Valium, if you supply us with those, we're prepared to give it a go. And he really did. The school remarked on this as well, how he changed almost overnight once we weaned him off the sodium valproate and clonazepam drug.
What, he got more energy again, and
he just became
more lively?
Yeah, he became a bright person again, yeah.
Oh, well, that's great. It's good that you took that risk. You could have left him on that for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And he didn't need to be.
No.
And he didn't have any more seizures?
I think he did, but again, it was just momentary.
You managed it.
Yeah, we managed it.
Did you ever face any sort of discrimination or any sort of challenges and struggles as he grew up, as parents?
I think it is difficult. There's no doubt about that. Sort of Hong Kong is not really geared up for disabled people. They're making a big effort now. When you go to the malls and, you walk around, you can see They are trying to improve accessibility for a start. I think probably the building standards, change that for us, thankfully. But there's still a lot of places which are not
So many
capable.
places, yeah.
I mean, going on the MTR with James, it's possible, but it's not really practical. I personally wouldn't do it. One of our helpers has taken him on the MTR a few times, but it takes forever. So it's just more of an adventure and something to do rather than a getting from A to B. It's important to have a car here that's got the mobility access.
So you've got that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about medical professionals? How did they treat you and James in Hong Kong? Because sometimes the medical systems are very good. We've got one of the best teaching hospitals in the world, but sometimes their bedside manner leaves a little bit to be desired.
Oh, you've noticed?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've encountered...
So did you find that as well?
Yeah, we've encountered a whole range of it. I have to say, some have been really nice and excellent professionals. And every now and again, you get this glimmer of light that, there's somebody out there that really does understand sensitivity and, understand what you need as a family. But quite often, as you say, the technicalities and the need for them to deal with the volume of people they deal with in the public system here means that the bedside manner is less than adequate. Very recently, actually this year, James ended up in hospital with a problem. He was actually in Chung Kwan O Hospital for a month. From January the 1st, New Year's Day, we took him in. It turns out he had a blocked bile duct and there was a procedure that they could use to remove that. And it was fine in the end, but it took an awful long time for them to diagnose. And during that time, there was no communication with James directly. This is something that we really noticed. They would only ever communicate very small amounts with us as parents going in. We had to really work hard to talk to anyone about what was going on, find out updates, because we were quite worried because it took them quite a while to find out what the problem was. And we thought originally it was liver failure. The way that the medical profession judges James when he comes in, it's almost like, this is a lost cause. And then they work out actually that this is a human being and that, we're a really caring family. So that side of it's disappointing. I sort of understand it. I don't blame the people in the hospitals for that, but I wish it could change, that they would understand that, there is a person behind that shell who can't communicate, but you need to give him that respect. I must say that this is not just Guilos or Western families. It's not just about the language barrier. There was a family in the bed opposite James, a young man who was about 32, 33, who had a severe autism. And he was having terrible fever. And the mum spoke really good English. She'd actually just returned from the UK, so they'd lived there for a number of years. She was having the same problems and was actually quite critical herself. So it wasn't just a culture thing. There was definitely a nature. It's definitely a problem that they have dealing with volume. And especially when we were there in January, it was that flu season that we had. And so the beds were absolutely full. There were people in the corridors.
I went to the hospital, Queen Mary, with a friend of mine once, and they offered her a bed on the floor. And it was just like, no, what?
I really do sympathise with the hospital system. It is fantastic. It's very like the UK.
And we've got some incredible doctors and, really skilled medical practitioners here. But it's just a bit disappointing. And I think also what you're saying is, a lot of people look at people in wheelchairs or people who can't communicate or, special needs children or adults, and they make an assumption that they can't hear you or that they don't understand what you're saying. And you can talk about them in front of them or, you can say things because it won't matter because there's no response, that they're not hearing it. But we don't know that. And there's actually evidence from people who have been profoundly unable to communicate, who then develop some ability to type or communicate, and then they, show that they can understand everything that's going on around them. And also people that have come out of comas and say that they could hear and understand everything that was being said about them.
Yeah.
So people have to really consider that everything that they say and every attitude or whatever can be really understood by that person, and that everybody, and this is something that, society really needs to work on with people with challenges or disabilities, that everybody needs to be treated with respect and equally. It's another subculture within our society that can be marginalised, and it's not right.
100% agree. And I think that's James's gift to us, is that teaching, that he's resilient enough to not let those things get to him. The fact that James is present in society. We take him, as I say, to rugby grounds, football grounds. stadiums and we get quite aggressive with people that don't treat him the way we want him to be treated. When I say aggressive, we
make
fight
it clear.
his corner.
Yeah. And I think that's good. You're educating those people,
that's
hopefully
the
next time they'll think differently if they come across this same situation with somebody else. So you might be helping someone else in another family as well.
Yeah. We're very fortunate at the moment. Our son Toby's playing professional football here. And so we get to go and see the games and we go to these different stadiums in Hong Kong. And of course, a lot of the stadiums are probably built from, 20 years ago, maybe earlier than that. And the wheelchair access is horrendous in most of them. Chung Kwan O is not too bad, but they do segregate. So we've been to Mong Kok Stadium, which is quite a new stadium, on a number of occasions to watch the games there. And we walk in with James and they immediately point us into the corner, which is completely the opposite side of the stadium where we want to be with our friends and the fellow supporters of the team. So we sort of say, no, James is coming this way with us. Oh, no, but that's where he needs to be over there. It's like, well, why do I want to be over there? Why does James want to be over there?
And can you wheel him right into where you need to get him with your friends and family?
Again, Mong Kok is, although it's new, it doesn't have wheelchair access in the stands. So you have to be at ground level. So James is just below us. We're seated in the seats just above the ground level.
Yeah.
And we, peer over and make sure he's all right. And, I'm not 100% sure James is entirely interested in football, but, he comes along and he watches what he can.
It's got to be good for him to get out and do things that are somewhat stimulating and giving him different environments. It can't be harmful.
No, absolutely
that's
not.
the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of what he enjoys? Like, does he like watching cartoons, or can you tell anything that he likes, or is it hard to know?
I know that he really likes light. When we were doing the program with St. Breville's, one of the things that we did was light stimulation. So we would darken a room and then we would do these little lights here and there. And he's always been able to follow lights quite well. He enjoys looking at lights. However, that was one of the things that triggered epilepsy, was a flashing light. So we had to be really careful. In fact, we were on the waterfront in Hong Kong on Kowloon side one time. I think it was Chinese New Year, and we were walking along and they have all these flashy lights. So I bought one and it triggered a mild seizure.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. Well, and so that wasn't very good. But yeah, so he likes things like that. He'll watch TV. He'll spot things from away as well. So when I walk in from work, he will look round and he'll see me. So there's things that you sense that he can take it in. And I think, as you were mentioning before, you have to treat him with respect and hope he is understanding what's going on. And that's how we've always played it.
Yeah. And I think it's just the only way you can do it.
Yeah.
Do you have any fears for him in the future or any sort of concerns?
He's certainly outliving all expectations. So that is a bit of a concern.
Were you given sort of a prognosis that he may not live past a certain age?
Not really, because they don't know what he's got. So
that's what I thought. That's why I didn't ask that question initially.
But I mean, I suppose typically people with these profound problems may have a shortened lifespan. And it's true to say that we probably, if we're honest, would say that he has outlived what we would have expected. But he's 29 now and he seems to be going really well. He's quite happy at the moment after the little problems he had in January. Where does that lead? I don't know. The fear is, of course, as we hurtle towards retirement, what happens then? So, yeah, that is a concern.
Do you have to plan for that now? I mean, I'm planning for my retirement now, starting to think about what are my options and what I'm going to do. We're similar ages.
Yeah.
Are you doing a similar sort of thing? Do you think you'll stay in Hong Kong? Do you have fears about being able to fund his treatments or whatever he needs as you get older and go into retirement?
Yeah.
Do you worry about your mortality and if he's still around, who's going to care for him? Do you plan for that, or do you just take each day as it comes?
Yeah, I think we do take it as it comes. I've become more aware of the impending retirement age, and certainly I don't think Hong Kong's an option for us. We don't own a property here, so sort of finding somewhere that's a little more reasonably priced,
friendly,
shall we say.
Would you go back to the UK, do you think, or you're not sure?
The UK is probably the prime option in terms of getting back into a health system and having James cared for if anything goes wrong with us.
Where are all your kids?
They're all here except Daniela.
Right, okay.
Yeah, we have Toby, Sam and Rosie are playing sport here, and James obviously is part of the package. So there's the 6 of us here and Daniela is in Amsterdam, about to have a baby.
Oh, how exciting. You're going to be a grandpappy. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, that's going to change dynamics a bit as well.
I mean, that's impending, isn't it?
It is.
And you could be heading off any day now, couldn't you, for that?
So I'm actually surprised I'm here because we're 3 days late now.
I know. So. I thought you were going to reschedule me. That's exciting. If you could do anything differently looking back, would you do anything differently?
Honestly, no. I think, having Daniela, as I say, as number one, and then James as number two. I would love James to be healthy and running around like the rest of them playing sport. That would be wonderful, but that's obviously not something that could happen. But in terms of the things I could control, no, actually, I've really enjoyed my career. I love Hong Kong. I've really enjoyed working for Cathay. The things that we've been involved in here in Hong Kong have been sensational, and it's been a great lifestyle. Would I like to have provisioned better for my retirement? Yes.
Me too.
Perhaps that's one thing I should have changed.
Well, you shouldn't have had 5 kids, maybe.
And that's what I was going to say. So that's what's killed it. Yeah. But I'm told each child is worth 1 Ferrari in their lifetime. So look at it differently.
So you just give up those 5 Ferraris.
Yeah.
Look, I'm so grateful that you've come along to share this story. I think it's so important for people to hear this. I think you'll really help open people's eyes who have no experience with special needs members in their family. I think you'll help people who are perhaps embarking on this or have this in their journey. And what do you hope that people take away? What sort of is the one message that you'd really like for the listeners to get from your story?
I think, as I said earlier, there is no script. And whether you have well children or special needs children, there's no script. You have to do what comes naturally with a bit of guidance. I mean, there's a lot of guidance out there that may or may not work for you. And there's a lot of people out there that would have you do things that maybe don't work for you. So you need to be resilient. You need to go with the flow, understand what works for you, find your own course, but don't be afraid. And I think there is no rule book. So you just have to do what feels right to you at the time. And don't punish yourself. I mean, I think that's one key message that we've been fortunate. And as I say, there are people out there that do punish themselves because of the circumstances under which they had their special needs child. But we're fortunate that we don't need to punish ourselves over that. And nature delivered James, this special needs kid, and hopefully we've allowed him to live as normal a life as possible. And I think that's the key to it, is enjoy the people around you and carry the special needs person through that life with you and let them be part of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. And what gifts have you taken away personally from having a special needs child?
It's a tough one. I think respect for people who have special needs children. It is challenging. And as I said, I think we've been lucky in many respects because of James's tolerance with life. We've had medical issues with him, but otherwise he's been really easy to look after. So people with autistic children
can be a lot harder, can't it? A lot more challenging.
And people seem to not understand those children. They just see a naughty child, growing up. And I think it's important to not hide from that. I think people need to know that this child is a special needs child, and that will bring tolerance in the community.
Absolutely. We had an incident with a child with autism coming back from a school trip where he had a breakdown on the plane and was threatening to bomb the plane and really going quite hysterical. And we just said he's autistic to people around, told the hostesses he has autism, and everyone was amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, if this was happening in the US, we'd all be arrested when the plane lands.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It was in Asia. Everyone was absolutely fantastic because we just explained to everybody around us what was going on and to the hosties.
Yeah.
And they were just fantastic, and we got it under control and calmed him down. So,
and people are generally, they are very supportive and understanding when they understand the problem that you face. I mean, when I look at some people I know from Sarah Rowe that are associated with Hong Kong Football Club, and they have a special needs football training session and tournaments and things, and it's just wonderful. And the community really supports that. And I think in Hong Kong, there aren't enough of the special needs groups visible to the rest of the community.
Everything you said before about, what you've learned about having a special needs child is something that translates to anybody who is advice for anybody who's embarking on a journey now with a special needs child. That was great advice. But the one thing you didn't mention is reaching out to support groups and finding other families. Do you think that's helpful?
Yeah, it is. When we first got to Hong Kong, we did meet up with a few families that had special needs children as well. And we created this special needs network. Because Hong Kong really didn't have a great network of support, we were sort of going it alone. And there were a couple of very strong characters there who drove this quite well. And, you found out things about therapy and, who the doctors to go and see, where to go and get it, what schools you could, rely on, where to get medication, how to get this, how to get that. And those things, I'm a little bit detached from that now because we've sort of not really needed to use those.
Yeah, you found your groove, yeah.
But yeah, for people who are just embarking on this journey, as you say, that is daunting. And you either get bombarded with it or you're completely isolated and you're scrambling for information. I think the thing to do is, there is a lot more information available today on the internet. And I think there's people out there that are much more understanding about how to assist if need be. So, don't feel you're alone out there. Just reach out.
Brilliant. Jim, thank you so much for coming to share your story and James's story with us today. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for being so open and just really having the courage to talk about something that many people don't feel comfortable talking about. And I think it's really important that we do open up the dialogue and we demystify the stigma associated with challenges, special needs children or disability. And, we start to open people's eyes in the community. So I think it's a really wonderful thing that you've done coming to talk to me today.
Thank you.
For my listeners out there, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please can you rate and review us on iTunes? If you could please share this story with your friends and family, this would be absolutely amazing. And I'm just going to ask Jim 4 secret questions that are going to go onto my Patreon page. And if you'd like to hear the answers to his 4 questions, you can go to Patreon/Hong Kong Confidential. And for as little as $1 a month to sponsor this program, you can hear Jim's answers to his questions. So thank you very much, Jim, for joining me today.
It's a real pleasure.
We'll see you on Patreon.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.